Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Kanthika. I am a Ph.D. student under supervision of Professor Cheng-Ta from Department of Psychology, NCKU in Taiwan. So it's my honor to be the host for today's webinar, and today's our topic is applying system factorial technology to study attention and decision-making processes. And today, Professor Yang will introduce us about decision-making processing, the conventional method used for studying the information processing. And then he will talk about system factorial technology and how to apply it with attentional and decision-making experiment. So please, everyone, welcome him. Professor Yang, please. Yes.
Thank you for the opening. So I'm Cheng-Ta from National Cheng-Ta University, and I'm also affiliated as at Taipei Medical University as the Dean of College of Social Humanities and Social Sciences. So today I'm going to talk about applying systems factorial technology to study attention and decision-making process. So this is the outline of my talk. So first, I will summarize issues related to information processing during decision making. And I will introduce several conventional methodologies to study information processing. And I will give you a very brief introduction to systems factorial technology, which was developed by Townsend and Nozawa in 1995. And finally, I will give you several examples of my studies to show you how to apply SFT to study decision-making process. So in the daily life, we are constantly, facing a lot of information, and how to process those, complex information is a very important issue for the cognitive scientist. So those information may come from different senses. For example, sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. So how to combine and process all information together to make an decision, especially for a correct and efficient decision, is very important. So there are several issues related to the information processing during decision making for the multiple signals. So I just list 4 important issues and properties related to the multi-attribute information processing. The first issue is about the mental architecture. And the second issue is about the decisional stopping rule. And the third issue is related to the processing capacity, processing dependency. And the fourth and the final issue is related to the processing capacity. And I will introduce these 4 properties in the following slides. So for the first one, the mental architecture. The mental architecture denotes the organization of the multiple mental processes. It's just describe the order of how to process the signals from different sources. So that could be divided into 2 kinds, at least 2 kinds. So for the first one, for the serial processing, which means you can only process a signal at a time, so without any time overlapping between each sub-process. And in contrast, for the parallel processing, which means you can process all the signals at the same time in parallel and simultaneously. And this is the differences between these 2 types of processing mental architecture. And for the second property, it is so-called the decisional stopping rule. The decisional stopping rule denotes the amount of information that is required for a decision. So take a serial processing architecture as an example. So for the exhaustive processing, you may need to serially process all the information sources, then you can make a decision. No matter whether it is sufficient or enough for decision making, you still need to exhaustively process all the information sources. But for the self-terminating stopping rule, which means you just need partial information to make a decision. So in this case, in the serial self-terminating case, you can process and terminate to terminate the information processing to make a decision only when only the information is sufficient for decision making. So you can terminate here and make a decision. The third property is so-called the processing capacity. So the processing capacity denotes the processing efficiency of an individual channel varies as a function of the workload. So if you have one active channel, then you have K capacity K. Then you add one more channel, so you have second channel here. Then if you are limited capacity in processing information, then then um, uh, then the capacity here would be 1/2 of the processing capacity. So if you don't have enough capacity, then you will be limited in processing the information. But when for the unlimited capacity case, if you have the K capacity here, then you add one more information, you add additional information to your system. Then for each channel, you still receive K capacity. So which means your capacity system is an unlimited capacity system. So for this final case, for the supercapacity case, so you have K capacity for one active channel, and you add one more channel here, then you will have superiority in processing each of the channels, which means your supercapacity in processing information. So we can combine these three important properties to infer the information processing during decision making. So conventionally, since 1960s, cognitive science, emerged, but and there are several conventional methodology are proposed to study information processing. So the traditional one would be the subtractive method proposed by Donders. And in this case, we can design one task, only involve two sub-processes here for the encoding process and motor process. And we can record the reaction time for this task. And we can then create another task that involve three processes. So additional in addition to these two processes, we add one more process in this task, and then we can record the reaction time. And we can use the reaction time for the second task, subtracted from the first task. Then you can infer the reaction time for the additional process. So that's how we calculate the processing time for each underlying process. So that's one way to study how information is processed in our brain. But using this methodology, we have a very strong assumption, which means that all the processes are conducted in serial, and there's no overlap between time overlap between sub-processes. But serial processing is just only one architecture of the information processing system. We may have a system with pair processing or even coactive processing. So after that, Stenberg in 1960s proposed another method, so-called the additive factors method, to study how information is processed in our brain. Okay, so according to this methodology, we need to have a double factorial design. So we need to, design two factors, and each factor has two levels, and we can record the mean reaction times for each combination. And then you can observe the interaction between the two factors to make inferences about how the two processes are organized in your brain. So for example, if you observe two parallel lines, which means there is no interaction between the two factors, then we can infer the system is a serial system, which means it's an additive effect between the two factors. And if you observe the reaction times of the two 2x2 combinations like this, then we can infer that there is an under additive effect between the two factors, then which implies the parallel exhaustive processing. And for the final case, if you observe the two factors, have an over additive effect here, there is not a parallel line, there is an interaction between the two factors, then we can infer the system as a coactive system or a parallel self-germinating system. So according to Stenberg's additive factors method, we can use a very simple, sub-calculation from the, reaction times of the 2x2 factorial designs. Then we can infer the additivity of the two processes and make a strong conclusion about how the sub-processes are organized in our brain. On the other hand, if you are familiar with the visual search literature, done by Anne Trisman, then she will suggest we can use the feature search versus conjunction search paradigm to test the seriality between different features. So on the left-hand side, you can see it's very easy to find a tilt lines here because so-called a feature search. So this kind of search is just based on the difference of a single feature. Then you can easily find a feature no matter the distractors, the non-targets set size increases. But on the right-hand side, if I ask you to find a how to say, to find a red horizontal line, then it will take your time to find the target here, because you need to combine the color and the orientation by your attention. Then you have to move your focal attention from one location to the other location, then finally you can find the target here. So this kind of search is so-called the conjunctive search, and it requires you to use your focal attention to bind the features together. So, in this kind of conjunctive search, if you increase the display set size, which means you add more distractors in the display, then the search time will be, will increase. So we can plot the search reaction time as a function of the number of items in the display. So if you observe the reaction time increase as a function of display set size, then we can infer that this kind of search is a serial search, which means serial processing. But if you observe the results pattern like this, which means the search reaction time does not vary a lot as a function of the display set size, then we can infer this kind of search is a parallel search with unlimited capacity. So this is one way to study the seriality of information processing, and we can use these results to infer the capacity of information processing. However, there's some problems occurring for the conventional information processing approach, which is so-called the problem of model mimicry. So for the problem of model mimicry, which means that different models may have similar or the same predictions on the reaction time results. If you just, use the mean reaction time to make inferences. So, which means in one study, Townsend has shown that para-exhaustive model, zero-exhaustive model can produce the same results as the para self-terminating models. So we need more, sensitive performance index to help researchers to, make strong inferences regarding the information processing properties. So due to this kind of constraints and limitations for the conventional information processing methodology, System Factorial Technology, in brief, we call it SFT, was proposed and developed by Townsend and Nozawa in 1995. And recently, an increasing number of researchers have applied this methodology to study the information processing and a variety of different areas. So this is the original paper, and this is Jim Townsend from Indiana University. And this paper, Townsend and Nozawa, has given a lot of mathematical derivations to show the proof of how to use the mean reaction times and reaction time distributions to make inferences about the information processing properties. And in 2017, I and my three collaborators, published a book about systems factorial technology. I think this book is regarded as a typical classical SFT textbook for readers. So I very strongly recommend this textbook. So if you are interested in the SFT, about its history, foundations, mathematical derivations, and how to uh, and applications, then you can read it, and you can uh, easily and quickly get familiar with this uh, SFT methodology. There are several advantages of SFT. As I mentioned to you, the problems for the conventional methodology is about the problem of model mimicry. So SFT is designed to, solve this kind of problem of model mimicry. And SFT is a non-parametric approach, so which means it is distribution free. So when you analyze data, you don't need to assume whether this data is come from a normal distribution or a Weibull distribution. Then you can just analyze that. And because it is non-parametric approach, then you can apply this kind of methodology to small sample size. So in any kinds of distributions, and no matter whether it is a small sample size, then you can still apply SFT to analyze data and make inferences. And there are several sensitive indexes stated here. For example, we can use the survivor functions to calculate the interaction contrast for the survivor functions. Then we can use this index to infer the mental architecture and stopping rule. And we can use the Haza function to for further calculation. Then uh, you can make inferences about the processing capacity. So those properties are described in the previous slides. So if you're still unclear about what's the architecture, decisional stopping rule, or capacity as, then you can go back the slides and get some insights from the meaning of the properties. So by using these sensitive indexes, then we can infer each of the properties, and we can avoid the problem of model mimicry. So we can precisely and accurately make inferences about the underlying mechanism during decision making. So those slides are, just a very, very brief introduction to SFT. I do not go, go into much deep details about how to do the calculation and how these derivations can, validate a specific model. But you can just believe me, we can use this different indexes to make inferences about the different properties of information processing. So from here, I will give you several examples to show you how to apply SFT in different research fields. So the first topic I would like to introduce to you is the topic of change detection and change blindness. So change detection is a very fundamental function of human vision. So you you it's very important for you to detect the daily changes in the environment. For example, you have to detect the change of the traffic light, then you can pass the road safely. And you also need to detect the change of for example, for the light of the engine, then if something, get warning, then you have to notice this kind of change, and you need to take in reaction. Otherwise, it's very dangerous for you. Or in the daily life, you may need to detect the change of your girlfriend's hairstyle. If you don't notice it, then maybe you will be broke up. You will be break up. So, you know, change detection ability is very important and it's crucial for our daily life. But in some experiments in the literature, many studies have shown that people may fail to detect a large change in our environment. This kind of phenomenon is so-called change blindness. I can show you a video about what change blindness is. So in this video, there is a flicker between two images, then you need to detect whether there's a change between the two images. So do you notice that? There is a change here. There's a change here, right? The engine has disappeared, but you may need take a long time to find this change, or even for some people, they cannot detect this kind of the change. But the engine disappears is very important and crucial in our daily life. So why and how people may fail to detect a large change? This is, this kind of question just attracts research interest to do a lot of studies. So some researchers focus on their attention, some researchers focus on people's memory, and my focus would be on people's decision-making process. So how they process those, multiple sources of information to make a change decision. That's my question. Sorry. So usually in the literature of cognitive science, there is a very classical model, so-called the signal detection model. Using the signal detection model, we can well characterize the detection performance of each individual observer. So according to the signal detection model, we will assume that people may process different features at the same time in parallel and simultaneously. And we will, sum the signals from different sources of information together to form a total activation. If the total activation exceeds the decision criterion, and then we will make a change response, then we will say there is a change occurred in the display. But this kind of signal detection model just follows a coactive mental architecture. But the multiple signals do not necessarily process in a coactive way. So maybe we can process multiple signals in a serial fashion or in a parallel fashion. But no studies, have challenged the basic assumption held in the signal detection model. So in my previous works, I have, published a lot of studies on decision-making process and change detection. We, applied a bunch of manipulations on the feature change to study how people process the feature changes to make a change decision. And we can apply SFT to do the double factorial design and to calculate the main interaction contrast and survivor interaction contrast. Then we can infer how people process different feature changes um, for making the change decision. So basically, we will use a one-shot change detection paradigm. So first, you will see a fixation in the center of the screen. Then you will see a pre-change display. And after a time interval, then you will see a post-change display. Then your task is to make a decision about whether there's a change between the display or not. And here we manipulate the two features of the feature changes. One feature is an orientation change, and the other is the frequency change. So we can have a condition that both changes occurred simultaneously. And we can have the other condition, so-called the single target condition, with only one feature change and the other feature remains. And we can also have a target absence conditions where no feature changes occur. So according to this task design, we can make inferences about how people process these two feature changes for decision making. And so I will not go the details. I will not jump into the details of the results. I will just give you the conclusion of the studies. So according to the results, we propose a hypothesis, so-called the relative salience hypothesis. The relative salience hypothesis, which means, decision mechanism is flexible when two feature changes are equally salient, which means two features are equally important for decision making. Then people will, use a parallel processing to detect the two feature changes. On the other hand, when there is a relative salience, which means one feature is more salient or more important than the other feature change, then a serial processing architecture will be adapted. So our results, just challenge the basic assumption held in the signal detection model. According to the signal detection model, we will assume that no matter whether there is a relative salience between the two features, all the participants will just adopt the coactive processing to process the two feature changes. So for the traditional signal detection model, it will not assume that the decision strategy may change as a function of the relative saliency. So I think this line of results is very unique and intuitive, intriguing for several reasons. So we approve that our decision strategy can vary according to the physical settings or top-down instructions or some probability manipulations. So participants can flexibly to adjust their decision strategy according to their subjective expected utility to make an optimal decision. And this line of research also, is the very important application of SFT in the visual science research. So, and then according, following this line of research, we are keep continuing on studying how attention may affect the decision making process. So in this line of research, we still try to manipulate the spatial attention to test the relative saliency hypothesis. And you can see in the previous work, we manipulate the relative saliency within one object. But in this line of the research, we use some attentional manipulations called the spatial cueing to cue participants' focus from one location to another location. So this line of research, um, can provide some insights about how the attentional manipulation may affect the information processing during decision making. So I, I also published several works related to this theme, and and these works, we combine the Posner Cueing paradigm with the SFT double dot detection task. So according to the Posner queuing task, there are two types of queues. One is the exogenous queue, and the other is the endogenous queue. So for the endogenous queue condition, you can see there is an arrow pointing to the left or right. So it will direct your attention to the right location here. And if there is a target, and we will call this kind of condition as a valid condition. And this, in contrast, if the cue points you to the right, but the target presents on the left location, we'll call it a invalid condition. So this is the arrow queuing as an endogenous cue manipulation. But you can see for the exogenous cue condition, there is no central arrow cue. You can see the peripheral box will light up as an exogenous cue. And you can see here, this is the valid condition, then this is the invalid condition. And we can combine this Posner queuing paradigm with the double dot detection task and study how participants utilize the validity of the cues to shift their decision strategies from pair processing to serial processing. So this is the main conclusion from this line of research. Our participants are able to utilize the validity of the cue to adjust the attentional window. So if the cue is a, uninformative cue, which means the cue does not provide you any information about the target location, then participants will, expand their attention to, wider their attention to encompass both target locations, and then they can process them double dots information simultaneously and in parallel. But if the cue is informative, which means the cue can 100% predict the target location, then participants will just follow the cue to detect targets. So you can see the participants' decision strategies will vary according to the cue validity. So which means participants can utilize the cue information to flexibly adjust their decision strategies, which again are consistent with the relative saliency hypothesis. So even in this very simple, feature detection task, as you can see, and the entracement's definition for the visual search literature. If you just want to detect a feature target and display, in the traditional, tracement's viewpoint, participants should be, always process the target information in parallel. But here, you can see participant strategies are, affected by the Q validity information. And you can see in some cases, participants can, serially process the information. So, so I would suggest that the processing mechanism is not simple as previous literature suggests. You need to use, more diagnostic methodology to help you to study how information is processed in the brain. And in the last topic, I would like to show you how to apply SFT in studying individual differences and decision making. People may differ from each other in many domains, right? So for example, here, people may, differ with each other in their processing architecture, in their stopping rule, and in their processing capacity. And how this processing capacity difference or strategy difference is associated with one's, age decline or personality trait or some other cognitive abilities that would be very interesting to study. And, this kind of individual differences may be also associated with the culture differences. So in one of my study, we apply SFT to study the face perception, especially for the cross-culture effect on the face perception. You can see there is an effect here, so-called the other race effect, right? So people may be, difficult to recognize the faces, the other race faces. For example, we are Taiwanese, then we are very difficult to recognize Caucasian faces, but we are easily recognize Taiwanese faces. So this kind of phenomenon is so-called the other race effect. So we use this stimuli to study the other race effect. So on the left-hand side, we ask people to recognize the Asian faces. And on the right-hand side, we ask people to recognize the Caucasian faces. And we apply SFT to study how people recognize faces. And a quick summary is that, quick conclusion is that Taiwanese participants can recognize Asian faces in parallel, but for the Caucasian face, they will use a serial processing strategy to recognize Caucasian face. So this kind of processing difference may account for why we are difficult to recognize the other race faces. So this is a very important application for SFT to study the face perception. And we can also apply SFT to study the age differences and cognitive abilities. So we construct a model to model simulate different parameters. For example, how people accumulate information, how people set up the decision criterion, and whether two channels has some inhibitory interactions, or they're unable to inhibit the distractor information. So we have one parameter to signal the inability for attentional control. And we can use the SFT, especially for the capacity analysis, to verify how this, 4 parameters can capture the actual capacity performance. And what we found is um, older people are, more conservative to make a decision, and they are, more prone to distracting information, such that they are, which means that they are unable to do a better cognitive control compared to the young adults. So this SFT methodology can, give us, more deep understanding about the processing mechanism between the age differences and processing information. And in one of my study, we also, use the SFT to study the motor expertise on information processing. Some motor experts, has better cognition than novice participants. And we also provide the EEG and ERP recordings for their performance to see how their brain activity can review the information processing differences. So we use the SFT double factorial design to do a study, and we assess the capacity, and we can see the motor, especially for the soccer experts, has larger capacity than the control participants. And we do the EEG and ERP recordings, and we found this kind of difference can be reflected by the P3 amplitude and latency, which means that we find a neural correlates of the capacity differences. And we can, use this kind of SFT to study the individual differences in working memory capacity and workload capacity. So I won't jump into much details here. If you are interested in this, we can have some discussions in the Q&A section. And this one is very interesting, so I would like to spend few minutes to study, to introduce you the study. So we use SFT. We apply SFT to study the individual differences in Chinese personality trait, so-called Zhongyong tendency, and the processing capacity. So by definition, Zhongyong is, a person who can consider things carefully from different perspectives, avoiding to extremes, and behave in situational appropriate way, and maintain interpersonal harmony. So we will assume that high Zhongyong thinking participants can, process more information in a more integrative way. So we use SFT capacity to study whether high Zhongyong thinking participants can integrate information more efficiently than low Zhongyong thinking participants. So we found a very nice correlation here. And I think if we want to address some, individual differences, we should consider the properties, the differences in the properties of information processing. And we can also use SFT to study collaborative decision making, which means 2 or more than 2 people works together. You can treat the collaborative system as a integrated system, and we can see how people's input are integrated in the collaborative system. And we published one paper here, and we use SFT to provide a new measure of the group decision-making efficiency to quantify the quality and quantity of how people works together. So I will not go into details here, and I will give you some conclusions of my talk. So my conclusion is that SFT can be used to diagnose the properties of information processing during decision making. And SFT can solve the model mimicry problem, as I mentioned in the very beginning of the slides. And SFT can be used to study the individual differences in decision making. So I give you several examples showing you we can use different SFT approach to quantify the individual differences. And XFT can be extended to study group decision making for the collaboration. So here's the end of my talk. I would be very happy to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for very nice talk and very interesting topic. Before we moving to Q&A section, I would like to invite every participant to open your camera so we can have a screenshot photo together. So
Yeah.
everyone, please.
Professor, could you stop sharing the PowerPoint?
Okay. Sorry.
Okay. Everyone here, can you open your video?
Open your camera.
Yes, your camera, so we can have a picture together.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So then after that, we will move to Q&A section. I see several comments on the Facebook and our help like our staff from the Facebook also post in the chat box. So Professor, please start answering the first question.
So I have a question. Some companies are trying to enhance mental health for their employees. Can SFT be applied to help them with that? We can apply SFT to study how people work together, and we have some suggestions. If, for example, if people are have similar ability to each other, then their work performance will be better. If one is an expert and the other is novice, and we ask them to work together, that would be terrible. So we can use SFT to quantify and qualify the collaboration between people. So we can provide a very nice measurement for the collaborative decision making. So this is one of my answer. How is the applicability of SFT applications when applied in practice? Can you explain more about this point? I'm not sure what's the practice mean. Practice. Okay, so if you want to apply SFT, then the most important thing is that you need to have two factors, and each factor has two levels. So this is so-called the double factor design. And you need to record the reaction time and accuracy for each condition. And after that, we can have some, calculations for the reaction time, mean reaction time, and reaction time distributions. So you can, based on the, calculation results, to make inferences. So that's the practice of SFT. Okay. From Facebook. What are the basic conditions required to SFT, and how much does it cost? It's free. So SFT, there's a free software, free toolbox built in R. So if you have the R statistical tool, then you can just download SFT analysis tool for free. But for me, our lab has some tools in MATLAB, so we can analyze SFT in MATLAB. So there is no commercial software for analyzing SFT. I think that's all the questions.
I guess you skip one question. They ask about what is the advantage of FFTs and also then these disadvantages. Yes.
Okay. So the advantage of SFT, I just stated in the PowerPoint. So it's a non-parametric statistical tool. So you can use it to any kinds of distributions, and you can use it to the small sample size data. So that's a very important advantage. But for the disadvantage, if you want to infer the RT distribution, then you may need, as many data points as you can. So that's a kind of trade-off. So if you want to get a very good results, then you need to collect more data. But if you can use another approach. For example, you ask one people to do 10 minutes, and you aggregate the data from all the people, then you can still also apply SFT. So it depends on the purpose and of your study. Then we can tune the SFT approach to different kinds of experiments. Do we have one more questions? Can SFT also be applied in terms of studying process involved in executive functions such as working memory, inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility? Yes, my answer would be yes. But you need to tune the traditional paradigms that fit SFT requirements. As I mentioned, SFT, for the SFT experiment, you need to have more than one, so which means you have two or more than two factors. Then you need to manipulate the level of the salience of each factor. So if you can tune your paradigm to this kind of structure, then you can apply SFT to do experiments. But if you can do that, I think these results inferred from SFT would give you more valuable information about the underlying structure or underlying mechanism of attention or decision-making process. So before you do experiments, you need to know the constraints and the basic designs of SFT. Then you can apply it to any kinds of field. Do we have more questions?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
I have answered all the questions, and thank you very much for listening to my talk. So if you are interested in how to apply SFT, just contact me, or you can, I would strongly recommend you the book that we published, and you can get a quick sense about how to apply SFT. Thank you very much.
Also, thank you everyone for joining our webinar today, and thank you for Professor Yang for your talk. So we will end our meeting from now on. And if you have any question or suggestion, please feel free to contact us. Yes, by the Facebook, or also you can send me an email. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye
Thank
bye.
you very much.
Yeah. Bye, Professor. Thank you, Professor.